panelists can see who they're speaking to. And yeah, even our panelists, could you post as well where you're coming from? And then, yeah, so welcome to the fourth, I think we're on number 4 now, webinar in our series, Unmasking Plastic, that we're doing here at SOA, supported by the Swarovski Foundation. This particular panel, we're talking about politics, policies, and it's called Politicize It, New Agreements for New Problems, basically. And so what we're going to be diving into today specifically is on how policy can be used as a solution to this problem. So for those who are new to the series and for our new panelists, we've started this series with a screening of the story of plastic. Melissa is actually joining us from Break Free from Plastic, who was instrumental in making that documentary a reality. We had a post-screening expert panel on sort of plastic generally and the problem in many different angles, sort of setting the stage. The last webinar that we had was called Research It. And now today, so I guess this is the third one, sorry. So today we'll be talking about policies rather. So without any further ado, thank you all for joining and posting, and I will turn it over to Patty.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being one more week with us. And yeah, we mentioned it just before, but if you have any questions, please do so in the chat. And we will stay a few more minutes after the main panel in case you have more questions that would like us to answer. And I think that we can just dive in and introduce the panelists. Thank you very much, Tim Grabiel from CL, Christopher Corbin from UNEP and the Caribbean, and Melissa Aguayo from Break Free from Plastic and the LA Reusable. I would like them to give you an introduction about themselves. Please be very specific why your work it's impactful for the planet. And yeah, thank you very much and for being with us. And would you like to start, Melissa?
Sure. Hi to everybody, and also welcoming questions in Spanish. I'm bilingual. I will be a little butchered, but please feel free to send those in. Hi everyone. My name is Melissa Aguayo. I am based in Los Angeles, California. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and really excited to be here with you all. Just to give a quick background, I'm the Member Engagement Officer for Break Free from Plastic for the US region, as part of the US coordination team. And I also help with Reusable LA, which is a local coalition in the Los Angeles area that's looking to pass policies to support reuse and refill culture. And I discovered environmental activism in college and have completely changed my life and have just dedicated myself to this, and started with education and outreach, because I like to talk to people, so that's where I kind of felt that I could make an impact, and then slowly started getting more and more into politics as I saw that was a way to really make change. So excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you very much. Christopher?
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. As mentioned, my name is Chris Corbin. I'm a program manager with the United Nations Environment Program at the Regional Seas Office, which is based in Kingston, Jamaica. So tropical environment, very dependent on tourism, and therefore very much impacted by the issue of plastics and of waste. I work for the Cartagena Convention Secretariat, where I have responsibility for our programs dealing with marine pollution, and for my sins now also advocacy and communication. And actually I have really seen the importance of that in being able to convince both politicians, policymakers, and the general public about how do we make that change now to better waste management practices. So a lot of what we've been trying to do as a regional convention is facilitate dialogue among all the countries, recognizing that plastics is a global problem, but the impacts are regionally and nationally. How do we bring on board private sector? How do we get the general public to change their behavior, change their attitudes, and hopefully move us on that sustainable development agenda? So thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure.
No, our pleasure. Thank you very much. And Tim, would you like to share with us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Grabiel. I'm a senior lawyer at the Environmental Investigation Agency based out of Paris. For those who don't know EIA, we investigate and campaign against environmental crime and abuse. We have 4 campaigns, one on wildlife, which focuses on protecting elephants, tigers, and pangolins. Another, forest, that focuses on deforestation and illegal logging. We have a climate campaign that works on the super greenhouse gases that contributed to the hole in the ozone, and also the next generation called HFCs, if anyone knows them, as well as methane. And then we have an oceans campaign that works on protecting cetaceans, so whales, dolphins, and porpoises, as well as the ocean from plastic pollution. We do this through a series of activities, and we're known for our undercover investigations, in which we infiltrate syndicates, we expose illegal trade patterns and actors, and work with enforcement agencies. We also engage regularly policymakers at the local, national, international level. And then obviously we work with the media and the public to help publicize issues. I myself, I'm a part of the ocean and climate campaign. So I work on issues related to ocean protection and protecting the climate system. I started off my career in Bushwick, Brooklyn, New York as a community organizer. I then moved to Los Angeles, where I worked for the Natural Resources Defense Council, suing major polluters. And then a little over 10 years ago, I moved to Paris and started working on European Union legislation, and then at the international level, always in climate and ocean protection.
Wow. Thank you very much. Again, we have a lot of expertise in this panel once again. I would like to direct, just explain a little bit more as an introduction, and is that I have the impression that policy is something that everybody thinks that needs to change, that is changing for good already, or that is not changing at all. People keep having these polarizing ideas about how policy is working at the moment with the plastic pollution issue. In our series of webinars, we're trying to be like a myth buster to each one of the topics we talk about. And so policy, as is one of the core issues, we are trying to get a little more deep background on what's happening now. And I think that the Caribbean is a place where we don't know much, or it's not so much on the international news when it comes to plastic pollution. And that's why I would like to start with Chris. Chris, could you please tell us a bit more about what it is and which is the role of a regional convention and MEA in promoting transboundary cooperation on marine litter, and specifically the one in the Caribbean?
Thank you so much. And that's such an excellent question in the context of a region like the wider Caribbean region that consists primarily of small island developing states. As a regional agreement, we cover 28 countries, Spanish-speaking, English-speaking, Dutch-speaking, French-speaking, Creole-speaking, from very affluent countries to very poor countries, from Aruba to Haiti. And as the Caribbean Sea, if you look at a map, the Caribbean Sea is almost completely enclosed by small islands and by countries. So the issue of plastics management and waste management is something that is going to be impactful for all of the islands. As a Regional Seas Convention, part of our role is really bringing all of the countries to the table. So first of all, they can recognize where the main sources of these plastics coming from. I was privileged of seeing a map that was done recently of all the plastics coming over from Europe and Africa, all towards the Caribbean. So you find that the beaches now, plastic material waste, not generated from the Caribbean. So it really does require a transboundary approach. It really does require regional cooperation. But the other point I want to emphasize is many of the small islands, as much as they have very high gross domestic products, also very heavily dependent on trade and on tourism. And this brings another dimension of plastics and pollution that is not usually thought about. So it really calls for regional cooperation. We look to our developed countries for the sort of technical assistance and technology, which will allow small islands to deal with this thing at an economy of scale level, because What we sell is our climate, our beaches, our clean environment, and that is definitely being jeopardized now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Melissa, I think that we could go. Corbin, Chris has, sorry, Chris has been mentioning like the different backgrounds and different kind of wealthy communities within the Caribbean, but we can also find different types of communities within one same country. And we're now living in a time where COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement that has resparked in the US, but it also have quickly spread to the rest of the world during 2020, made differences between communities, both from communities within a country, and as I said, and within the same country. Yeah, it makes this difference very vast. In the Story of Plastic documentary, as we said, we learned that plastic waste also plays a vital role in socioeconomic differences among population. How does policy play a role in reinforcing socioeconomical differences when it comes to plastic waste mismanagement and its pollution?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like Tim probably has some good insight to that on the international policy level, because there are, to Christopher's point, there has to be, this is a systemic issue, right? Plastic is a systemic problem. And so we have to think about it we have to think about systemic solutions. And we also have to, plastic moves throughout its entire life cycle. People really kind of tend to think of plastic moving at the end of its life cycle when it ends up in our oceans or in our communities. But from the point of extraction to when it's getting manufactured, getting shipped to the companies that are then selling it to us for use, and then for waste, it is constantly moving. And unfortunately, there are impacts throughout that entire life cycle. And what we're finding, which is especially true in the United States, and I'm sure in other countries as well, but it's a huge disparity between who is actually feeling those burdens in a more disproportionate manner. And it tends to be disadvantaged communities and communities of color. So communities that have been disenfranchised, low-income communities that are disproportionately bearing this brunt. So when you're looking at when policies are being passed, a lot of the times they're allowing things like incinerators or different facilities, polluting facilities like that, and they're not being placed in communities, in the more affluent communities. They're being placed in those communities of color and those disenfranchised communities. So you're seeing that happen with at the beginning of the life cycle and at the end of the life cycle, right? So where the points of extraction are, where those manufacturing plants are, and where those incineration and landfills are as well. And so I think in something that we've seen happening in the US, which is great, is really trying to bridge that divide between the environmental organizations and environmental justice and frontline and fence line organizations, and really starting to start that larger dialogue to see how they can work together to combat this, because it's happening throughout that full life cycle, throughout that value chain.
I remember one of our conversations back in June, I think it was May, June, that you were writing a piece in Spanish for an LA newspaper. And I was like, sometimes I still feel like I'm very naive. And you were saying, in your piece, you were saying that in the previous campaigns, and every time you try to fight for a new kind of ban or to put a tax on certain products such as plastic bags or plastic straws, there is like a common theme there that is like the industry and certain like more conservative policymakers try to pitch very like dangerous ideas or not very sustainable ideas to Latin communities and communities that have been marginalized for a long time. So to me, it was like a very like eye-opener, because normally you see these communities being always blamed by being like not disposing their waste properly or something. But when it comes to create new policy, they try to approach them and try to put them fear, right? So that's what I thought that it was a good question, because it's a way of visualizing like the flexibility that they use for certain communities when they play for their own good. So
Yes.
thank you very.
Yeah, and if just as a direct response to that, industry is really good at, they invest a lot of money in those communities. They promise a lot of jobs. They do things like support like the AYSO team and things like that. And it's a teeny fraction of what they're making while they're continuing to pollute those communities. So there have been some amazing studies, which I'll try to link in the chat here, that are really trying to, and reports that are really trying to expose the fact that, one, they completely overpromise on jobs, and two, these facilities that they're promising that are going to lead to lots of jobs and are going to be really successful in managing this waste actually are not living up to those expectations in any way. So I'll try to find those. There's some really amazing reports from Greenpeace and other folks that have come out lately. I'll try to add them in the chat here for y'all.
Yeah, thank you very much. And please, exactly the same for the rest of the panelists. We are forming a library for all our participants that we are going to display at the end of the web series. So we will have like a reference list for each one of our panels. So please, again, feel free to share any reports with us or any like remarkable information. Tim, now I go for you. We have seen some progress at international level in addressing plastic waste with the recent amendments to the Basel Convention, which deals with the waste trade, and discussions are going on how to reduce plastic pollution from ships at the International Maritime Organization. But you are also fighting for more at the international level, including a new convention on plastic pollution. Is this needed? Why? Why is this needed?
Well, that's the question we commonly get. But I think the answer, when you think about it, is pretty straightforward. I mean, we're dealing here with a global problem that is going to necessarily require a global solution. When you look at it from a marine plastic pollution frame, for example, we have plastic enters into the ocean through various sources across the globe, and is transboundary by nature. I mean, all rivers and drains seem to run to the ocean. And so we can't have one country acting alone to protect our oceans from plastic pollution without the others making common commitments. And so just thinking about sort of the harms that we want to prevent, it seems to be that we need to come together and work together. But another thing that's related to preventing plastic pollution in the environment is our progress towards a circular economy for plastics, for the plastics that we do use, which will happen. And on that front, as Melissa was saying, plastics are globally traded and make their way across the globe all throughout their life cycle. And we need to think of ways that we can address the full life cycle of plastics early on in production and design, so that when at the end of life we want to put it back into the economy, we know that it's safe, that it doesn't contain unknown toxins that are harmful to children and women and others, so that we know that it has a restricted class of polymers, so that we can more easily collect it and mechanically recycle it and get it back into the system and create those closed loops. So there we need cooperation, coordination at the international level as well. And so to be able to hit our targets on plastic pollution, on preventing plastic pollution, and to push for this global circular economy, we're going to also need common commitments and strategies. And that's what I just described in a global agreement. The amendments to the Basel Convention were important because they took at the very end of the life cycle. They will provide some transparency on the movements of plastic waste, and they will create incentives for sorting and trying to deal with the stuff domestically. So that's great. The International Maritime Organization is looking at what measures it can take to reduce plastic pollution from ships, and that's fantastic as well. And they have the competency to do that, and they should move forward. But that is only a fraction of the plastic that is making its way into the ocean. And so we need something else. Now, UNEP in 2017 did a study, a very comprehensive study. I forget how many pages it was, but hundreds and hundreds. I loved every one. And it looked at 18 international instruments and 36 regional instruments. And what it found was a landscape that was fragmented, that was in no way adequate to address plastic pollution, that did not take a life cycle approach. And therefore, the conclusion was that something else was needed. And so this is why we're promoting a convention on plastic pollution, one that can take this life cycle approach that we need, one that brings in the country so that we can talk about how we're going to make common commitments, the strategies that we're going to design, and how we're going to get a handle on this problem. And the main avenue through which these conversations are happening right now is through the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is the highest environmental governing body in the world. And we're very optimistic that we will be able to unlock negotiations in the coming months, but we'll ultimately have to see, as things have been a little delayed with the COVID crisis.
Yeah. But again, it could be, as you said very well, it could be something that it's global. It's everyone has to follow the same strategy, or at least very similar. So that's actually something that I normally get asked, like, oh, why don't we always try to do something, like, why don't we try to do something common? And of course, not every country can do the same, but there should be something that is common to everyone. Because as Chris said before, this is a transboundary problem. So we cannot fix it unless we all have we all participate into solutions. And as you were saying, Tim, we always the Basel Convention, as it is right now, they try to see the whole life cycle of plastic, from production to the end life of the products, right? But this also passes through consumers and through industry. And I also see very often, sorry, Melissa?
I think, and I could be wrong, but I think Basel focuses mainly on and this new amendment is really trying to look at it from it moving to different countries, like it getting shipped to different countries when it's already waste. So I think it's more focused on the end life cycle, not the full life cycle.
I would just chime in to say that that's absolutely true. There are some guidelines though under Basel, and it may be that you're referring to some of those where they look at prevention of waste as an initial matter.
Yeah.
And it has useful guidance, I think, for countries that take a look at that.
You're right. Sorry, I was in my head. I was saying the new global agreement. Sorry, sorry. Sometimes I'm very ashamed. Sorry. So the new global agreement, it will try to scope from the very beginning of the plastic production to the very end of the end life. And as we were as we were saying. Consumers have to do efforts to create solutions, but also companies have to contribute to make their solutions. But normally I have the impression that when it comes to media, they keep sharing media and blaming who has to do what. Companies keep saying like, oh no, or big companies like Coca-Cola and these big brands keep saying like, oh no, is the consumers the one that we have to blame for our problems? And I think that the case of extended producer responsibility, it should be more really extended to the producers. I would like to know more about your views on extended producer responsibility schemes. And could you elaborate more on how this function in practice, what is currently happening with these extended producer responsibility schemes? This question could be for any one of you, of course.
I'll take a crack at that, just sharing the European experience. But I will say, in my experience, extended producer responsibility is still in the early stages for plastic. It's been developed more so in the context of electronic waste and some other products, but in plastics, it was rather a new concept, I would say, in the European Union. But we recently adopted what's called the Single-Use Plastics Directive, which requires extended producer responsibility for several plastic products that we couldn't ban. So a lot of single-use products were banned in the European Union, but then there were others such as, I'm trying to remember this, food containers, beverage containers, wet wipes, tobacco filters, fishing gear, where the approach that was advanced was producer responsibility. And what that means, and these programs are still in development, these schemes are still in development, but producers will need to come together. And in the EU, this will be through a producer responsibility organization, some sort of entity that they all have to contribute to and help with its operation, that will undertake a series of activities and cover certain costs. The costs include awareness raising on the negative impacts of the environment. They include the collection and then the transport and the treatment of the products. And they include cleanup to the extent that any of them make their way out. And this is a way in which those who put these products on the market would take responsibility to ensure that they don't stay somehow in the environment, and when they're collected, that they're lightening the burden that would otherwise fall on the local municipalities for waste management. So it's a way of internalizing the cost of these products, which they're making money off of. We have a target date for these to be operational in 2023 and 2024, depending on the product. And so it's very much an ongoing conversation. There's a lot of guidance that's coming out of the European Commission on how these should operate. Member states are setting them up as we speak, and we're highly optimistic. But it's also going to be a bit of a trial and error thing. There will be successes. You know, some probably more than others. I think bottles have a market value that probably ensures their capture a little more easily than tobacco filters. And so just sort of sorting out what works best, and then maybe whether additional policy measures are needed is something that over the coming years we'll be sorting out.
Thank you. Would you like Melissa or Christopher to add something? Christopher, you have been quiet for a while.
Maybe just to add a little bit, I fully agree. Even a region like the Caribbean region, even more in its infancy, but something that's recognized as being critical. I think I saw a comment from one of the participants as to what Seychelles is trying to do as a small island, and you're finding many Caribbean small islands would like to incorporate extended producer responsibility, but then that's going to involve dealing with some of the big multilateral corporations where sometimes they don't have that lobbying and negotiating power, and that's where the importance of regional cooperation is so critical. What we do see happening more is more at a domestic scale, where you have small and medium enterprises, you have supermarkets, you have hotels, starting to take a little bit more responsibility, for example, to reduce the use of single-use plastics, to change some of their procurement practices and consumption patterns. And they're even doing this without the necessary government legislation and regulation. Sometimes they're doing that as part of their corporate responsibility. Sometimes it's because they're under international certifications. And that's why even what's happening at the global level can be an important driver, especially to make change within the developing countries. But it really is the way as to how do we now incentivize or disincentivize producers at national level, at regional level, globally, to make those sorts of changes that were mentioned, design out single-use plastic completely. And that's outside of the realm of control of many of the smaller islands.
So in 2 weeks, we are going to have a seminar on circularity and how circular economy works, not only focusing on recycling, which is with many organizations, companies, and industry are focusing their attention and say like, oh, we are using extended producer responsibility and we are going to recycle, and they do all these like huge promises, but the system, the recycling system is not made as it is right now for coping with all those recycling. So it sometimes feels a little bit like, for in some companies feels a bit like greenwashing. But not all of them. There are many companies that they're really trying to do their best. And just a reminder for our participants, we are going to have that conversation in 2 weeks with another 3 to 4 experts. So please keep following us. And Melissa, would you like to add something into the conversation?
Yes, please.
Yes.
We love talking about producer responsibility at Break Free from Plastic. Yeah, I mean, to your point, yes, I think that there are some companies that are doing really amazing things and trying really hard to change the systems, but at the end of the day, it's not really an even playing field. And I think that's where EPR can really come in to start to even out that playing field, make it more, allow those companies that want to do the good thing to really be able to continue to do so. And as you mentioned, a lot of these companies, these like large multinational companies especially, are really good at promising a lot of things that they just aren't doing. Or it's, they tell you like, oh, we're going to invest like $1 million. And you're like, oh my gosh, $1 million, that's amazing. Except they're, raking in billions. And it's a teeny tiny fraction, and it's not really doing enough. And unfortunately, a lot of what they push is also, do cleanups, do recycling, like chemical recycling. It's all things that are allowing them to continue to produce as much waste as they're producing. And so it's really, we can do cleanups till we die, and it's not going to make an impact unless they start making changes, right? Unless we start just producing less and being smarter about what we're producing. And they have, Coca-Cola, let's take Coca-Cola, who has Break Free. I'll share a little bit about the brand audits, but one thing that we have started doing is taking those litter cleanups a step further by documenting the brands that are found on plastic. So actually saying who are these polluters, who are these companies that are producing all of this plastic, looking at it on a global scale and being able to identify who are the top polluters and being able to target them accordingly, and calling them out on their promises that just aren't enough. So really even taking a step further and seeing like, well, what are these projects that they're saying that they're doing? Let's actually see what is happening with those, because a lot of the times there's not a lot of transparency around that either. So, they have really fancy names like Alliance to End Plastic Waste and all of these things, but it is forms of greenwashing. And I think that people are starting to wake up to that. A way that we've been able to kind of spread that awareness and really start to reframe the narrative, right? It's not consumers' fault. It's not our municipality's fault, but it is these, and sure, we all play a part in that, but they do as well. So really trying to reframe that conversation, to reshift the focus to them as the polluters, and to start to really push on the things that are necessary for them to do for us to be able to break away from plastic. So I'll put in here, it's we've been doing these brand audits for the past couple of years. This is the 3rd year. It is a tight turnaround. The deadline to submit your data is October 15th, but just really encourage you all. It's something that you can do just in your family or in your household. I know it's a weird year this year, but there are ways of doing so safely. And it is a very eye-opening experience to just kind of go through and catalog all of the different things that you're finding, and you very quickly start to see a lot of the same brands pop up again and again.
Which, like what you're saying to me, it just like, yeah, everything makes how to say, it's like there are many places. What I'm just remembering all the conversation we have had, sorry, in my brain, and sometimes it's like too much information. But Chris was saying, like, we have been talking about the movement of plastic on the ocean that is transboundary. We have been talking about greenwashing. We have been talking about extended producer responsibility, but for example, and as Catherine was saying before, like to introduce the ERP, in Seychelles or the Caribbean, I believe that there is no such a big production of plastic pollution, of plastic itself in the Caribbean, but still you have to deal with all the problems. Like you are small islands, and you depend for the products to come from outside your country, and you have the waste, and you don't, like, the system is not made to deal with that waste, but at the same time, you are also receiving all the waste from another countries. So would you like to add anything else, Christopher, on that?
No, I mean, it's interesting. In 2017, Antigua and Barbuda, one of the small Caribbean islands, was one of the first ones to institute a ban on single-use plastics and styrofoam containers. When UNEP launched its Global Clean Seas campaign, I think over 20 countries from Latin America and the Caribbean signed on. Antigua and Barbuda, I know, linked up with the Maldives to set up a group of friends within the United Nations to address plastic. So there is this political momentum, but then there's the reality check. How do we deal with packaging, which accounts for as much as 40% of our plastic waste? We also have waste which people don't tend to think of, but that comes from shipping and the fishing industry. We are not dealing with abandoned and lost fish and discarded fishing gear at all. There are no systems for recycling and for reuse. So it's now about customization and not a one size fits all. Because you rightly said that, yes, these global corporations come up with what sound to be these wonderful ideas. One of them, for example, is waste to energy. Is waste to energy really suitable for a small island of less than 50,000 people? So it really is a dynamic debate that requires us to systematically look at what are appropriate business models for each country. It's not all about blaming, and I really love the point by Melissa. We always hear like, we need better waste management. Yes, we do, but better waste management alone will not solve the plastic issue. We need more cleanups. Yes, we do, but again, it's not only cleanups, it's not only the consumer. So I really like her recommendation that this has to be holistic. This has to look at the whole life cycle, and it can't be that you have a model solution that works for all countries. It just doesn't, it's not gonna happen.
Exactly. I have one more final question, and I have a few more in case we have time, but I can see that we have a few questions from our participants. So if it's okay with you, I will ask my final main question and we will pass to the participant questions. I always like to finish somehow with something positive and something that is tangible and something that what our participants can do. And I have the feel, when I talk to people who do not work with plastic related issues, I usually found a common theme when it comes to policy issues. And many of them are willing to improve or change their behaviors, and they are eager to know more about what is in their hands to do more. But they very often feel powerless. This is what they tell me. Like, I feel like I'm changing many things, but at the same time, I know that we're many, and I feel powerless. They believe that if the policy doesn't change, nothing will change, and their actions won't make any difference as an individual. What would you say to people that think that the battle against plastic pollution is already lost from a policy point of view? I know that we have talked here about like big and planetary commitments and conventions, but like, yeah, like what would you say to these people, and could you give us some tips of what can we do, each of us, to improve currency policy initiatives? Do normal citizens, like common citizens, are they able to participate on policy making?
Maybe I can jump in first.
For sure.
In a previous life, I used to work with one of the Caribbean governments, and I guess the question is who sets policy within any government? Is it a politician, a minister, senior policy makers, or the general public? And I remember when we used to have slogans like every action counts and every voice counts, and I firmly believe in that, because we have seen some really positive experiences in terms of how youth have become so engaged in this issue of plastic pollution, how civil society, how NGOs have become so engaged, and how small actions have really already started to show benefits. Antigua and Barbuda, I use that as an example. Within a year, they started to see significant reductions by as much as 40% in the amount of single-use plastics arriving at their solid waste landfills. So already beginning to see that kind of benefit. The international coastal cleanups that were done in Jamaica after they instituted their plastic ban showed less plastic bottles and bags on the beaches. So I think it's important that the general public and people who feel that, you know, this is outside of their control are given positive feedback as well, so that they are aware as to what individual actions they're taking are actually making a difference. And then I just want to support that last comment. I saw collectively the influence on the business and governments through consumer demand. Consumers are powerful. I don't think they realize how powerful they are in changing that narrative. And I think that that's something that we can all take heart from. Thanks.
So that's something that we have been saying in every single one of our webinars, and I didn't have to say it again because you did it, so thank you very much. Tim, would you like to add a comment?
Sure. As I mentioned in the beginning, I cut my teeth, as we say, on community organizing. I'm working on community organizing, and so I have an appreciation for working at the local level, at the community level, first and foremost. And while, you know, when I was doing this in New York, we're looking at the local government, the city of New York. It doesn't have to be even that big. It could be even smaller. So I know Break Free from Plastic has a plastic-free campus campaign. I'm not the one to be able to describe it in its entirety, but it's where students themselves can go about and champion the banning or the reduction of single-use plastics on their campuses, and then start to initiate those sort of conversations. Local communities that are seeing pollution in their environment are easily able to start to address the issue with the local government, because it is a nuisance. It's something that should be that they should pay attention to. And what happens is when you start to work at those levels, you find yourself getting pulled upwardly. And so while the issue is ultimately we're going to have to reduce the amount of plastic that we produce, and we're going to have these grand designs of a clean world, a world free of plastic pollution, that we only use what we need, and we have all these unnecessary uses have been eliminated, and otherwise, we have captured it in the circular economy. We have these big visions, and that's grandiose, and that seems hard to think about how you would attain. You start off locally, and you'll start to find that you'll be pulled upwardly, and soon you'll be in those conversations, and you'll be directing them. You'll be creating the narrative. And so my advice to anyone that's interested in getting into these issues is find the issue that most significantly affects you and your community, start from there, and then just run with it.
Pretty powerful already. Like starting from small, like the change can snowball to big problems. So to big solutions, sorry. So thank you very much. Melissa, would you like to add something? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my amazing fellow panelists did a really terrific job, but just echoing a lot of what they already said, which is really like the local is so important. And to Tim's point, the local work drives the state, drives the country, et cetera. So it just has all of those things that happen locally. Sometimes they need to see it. They need to be able to show that it, like, prove that it has worked. And so doing it locally, it could act as a case study. It could inspire others to do the same. So it can be really powerful. And ultimately, I know it doesn't feel like it a lot of the times, but again, like consumers are powerful, but so are we as individuals. Like these people that represent us, these politicians, they were elected to represent us in what we believe in. So it is their duty to listen to what we have to say. So I think we sometimes underestimate just how powerful our voice is, and we use it, to vote, but it doesn't stop there, and it shouldn't stop there. It should, connect with your local electeds, find out who your city council person is, who is your state representative, set meetings with them and start sharing what you care about. What are they doing to work on that issue? And start connecting with others as well. Find the points of intersection. I think one thing that has been really inspiring for me is really seeing how the movement has really grown and how we're starting to really see some movement building with climate, with youth, with with labor. It's with the racial justice movement. So there is starting to be some of that intersectional work that is certainly challenging, but when you can find where your values align and where those needs might be the same, and start to fight for those solutions that have multiple benefits, it's really powerful work. As we've talked about the industry and how influential they are. They have a ton of money, but we have a lot of people and we have a lot of heart. So we need to start connecting all of those and really putting it to work.
Yeah, great. That's a terrific answer. Sorry, I'm just going through questions of our participants, and the Sustainable Ocean Alliance is as we know a platform as well for ocean young leaders, and many of them are already wondering what to do in their professional lives because they're young, but it's very hard, and I experience myself those kind of issues, like not finding the right job, or when I was starting, it was incredibly hard to get into research about plastic pollution, and every field of working with plastic is different. And Marta Muntoni asks here, like, what advice could you give to a young person who wants to work in the field of plastic pollution, especially in the oceans? It seems impossible to find relevant internships or jobs which don't require years of experience. I already volunteer in my city, but nothing seems enough. Do you have any advice on how to enter in this field of work? Thank you in advance. So you, as professionals that have many years of experience, what would you say to our participants on how they can professionally get their heads into an organization, or if they have already volunteered?
I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a question that's often asked, and it's a really tough question because everyone's path is so unique. My late grandmother used to always tell me, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But to be honest, I think you need to know something as well. And for me, I can appreciate the satisfaction with sort of having put yourself out there, interning, maybe possibly for free, trying to look for a job in a limited space with limited opportunities, and then they're looking for people with some experience that you can't necessarily fit into that box. As someone who's been in the movement for a while, since the beginning, I have always found it useful to not necessarily approach people with this question, how can I get in the sector? But to approach them to get a sense of the landscape that exists in any given area, any given space that I want to operate. So when I first moved to the European Union, I didn't want to approach someone from an organization asking for a job, but I sat down with them and I talked about the landscape and what opportunities might exist out there, and just sort of generally expressed my interest in being a part of the movement. And then what I found was that the people that I sat with, maybe they didn't have an opportunity, but then they started to conspire with me to find out if they could put me in contact with someone, or and suddenly I had all these co-conspirators that were helping me look for a job in a continent that I just moved to with no job. And it was through these discussions where you're not putting yourself out there as someone who's trying to get a job with any given individual, but yet you're calling on their experience and seeing if they want to become a co-conspirator of yours. That was helpful for me, and it's just one approach. That I think sort of falls along with what my grandma had said, which is not what you know, it's who you know. So sometimes it's about getting lucky and finding the right person who can help you out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience. Christopher?
Yeah. No, maybe, and I thanked him, because then it forced me to think, what did my grandmother or my mother tell me? And definitely try and follow your passion. What really excites you, what really is interesting to you. what you might find in an area such as plastics, which is now the growing thing, is that getting involved there might not necessarily involve a straight line approach. And I think of myself now being in the UN. I never thought I would ever be in the UN. It was never in my goals. I never thought about working in plastics and marine litter and pollution. So I spent a little time working as a scientist. I spent time working with the government. I spent time working with a private sector agency. But all of those give you additional skill sets. So sometimes you have to think, well, I may not get exactly what I want now, but just being given that opportunity to build on your skill sets that can contribute to being part of the solution to this problem. So it doesn't matter if it's from a legal perspective, an economics perspective, a research perspective, all of those now are part of the solution to this really, serious challenge. So I would just encourage, to build up as much of your skill sets as possible. Make yourself that you can do various aspects of this, and yes, be open to not necessarily taking a straight line path.
I'm taking some of that for myself. Huh? Thank you. Melissa, there is something that you would like to add?
I think they really hit the nail on the head there. I'm really digging Christopher's comment. Someone just said it to me recently, and it really was like, activism is never linear work. So it's never, this like straight path. And to Tim's point as well, I think, just putting yourself out there. I know it's hard, and it does feel like sometimes there are limited opportunities, especially for if you don't have the organizational experience. But I think that I get the feeling that people are starting to kind of recognize that you don't necessarily have had to have worked in an organization for X amount of years, that you can still bring that passion and a different kind of skill set that is still going to help you be successful in this work. So yeah, just reach out to people. It's scary, but reach out. I love Tim's suggestion of not saying like, I'm looking for a job, because that could be a little bit of a turnoff of like, oh, well, I don't have anything to offer you, so maybe it's not really worth meeting with you. But if it's like, hey, what advice can you give me? I think that there's a lot of people who are really eager and keen to help, and would love to lend their support in whatever way they can.
Yeah, also in my experience,
but we need y'all, young people.
Yeah, no, and in my experience, I see that the people who think that they don't have anything to offer sometimes are the ones that have more to offer. It's just like, as more we know, more we think we don't know. So we just need to be bold and go for it. And this conversation has been already very fruitful, because we have lady from Sea Change saying that Sea Change would be happy to discuss internships or research opportunities with any SOA young leader, and she can be reached at Shannon@theseachange.org. So it's on our chat. So please, participants, go there and see the link, and maybe from here you get the internship or a job or research that you were looking for. We have a few more minutes, and as last week, I would like to take a question in Spanish. I don't know how is your Spanish, Tim?
Rusty, but I'll understand it for sure.
Okay, good. So we have someone from Peru, Carol Salazar. And I will take that in Spanish, okay, because she wrote in Spanish. Como ciudadanos peruanos tenemos la opción de enviar nuestros comentarios para los proyectos de normativas y leyes antes de que estos sean oficializados. Para ello es de carácter importante colocar como referencia documentos, acuerdos o investigaciones que pueden ser internacionales. ¿Cuál podría ser un documento base que podemos tomar como referencia para comentar los proyectos de normativas sobre la contaminación por plásticos? Yo creo que esto cambia de país en país, pero bueno, Carol, a ver qué es lo que opinan Melissa o Christopher. Tú sí hablas español, ¿cierto?
Hablo un poco español, pero
un poquito.
es un poco más fácil a responder en inglés, pero sí hay muchas publicaciones sobre las leyes, las regulaciones, por ejemplo, en el contexto del el manejo de plásticos. Por ejemplo, PANUMA en este momento, yo creo dentro de 1 o 2 meses, tiene una publicación cuáles son mejor prácticas en todos los países en América Latina. Y nosotros tratamos de desarrollar una mapa interactiva donde hay regulaciones, donde hay legislación y donde hay políticas en este área. Y yo creo que es un buen recurso para Perú también, sí.
Tu español es perfecto, así que no te preocupes porque se ha entendido perfectamente. Melissa, ¿te gustaría añadir algo?
Ya, nomás para seguir con lo que dijo Christopher, se dependen en el tipo de póliza que se va a pasar, ¿verdad? Si hay, como ahorita voy a pasar en el chat, uno para bolsas, para el ban de bolsas plásticas y otro para tratar de poner un depósito en latas y botellas y eso. Hay muchos recursos. Y nomás lo que diría es que busquen a los expertos que ya han pasado este tipo de leyes y nomás díganle que me puedes pasar el lenguaje que usaste para ¿cómo se dice? Política, para la ley o lo que sea, para la ley, y te la pasan con mucho gusto porque quieren que se volver a usar. No hay razón de que se tenga que volver a inventar nada, casi todo existe, reach out y pregúntale a la gente que ya ha hecho esto y casi te aseguro que con gusto te lo pasan.
Genial. Pues muchísimas gracias. Everything that we have mentioned just before, we are going to put it on English on our mail letter, if I'm not wrong, right, Ron?
Yeah, we will put together the post-webinar email, which will include all of the links that have been posted in the chat and any more resources as well that Christopher was referring to. And yeah, we'll also have an English version of that question.
Okay. We are reaching to the end. Would you like to the end of the time? We can stay a bit longer as we said in the beginning, but in case someone has to leave, can do so. Ron?
Yeah, so if Tim, Melissa, Christopher would like to maybe give some, any 1 minute or less concluding remarks on this topic of plastic policies, some key takeaway that you want people to walk away with, that's great. And then we can maybe take a few more questions after we've closed. And thank you to all of our attendees who've been joining us week after week and those who are new.
Maybe just a couple of take-home messages from my end is this is a complex issue, but just to send home a real positive message that I don't think that we can lose faith. I think a momentum is building nationally, regionally, globally. So we have to take as much advantage as is made available to all of us to have our voices be heard. And the second take-home point, as much as we've been talking quite a lot about plastics and plastic waste and policies, we are finding more and more the need to have integrated approaches. So even within the plastics discussion, how do we look at that within a wider blue economy discussion for small islands? And how do we look at that with a climate change and with biodiversity? So the other take-home message is that in changing the narrative, we also have to be more open to recognize there are social issues, economic issues, environmental issues. And the more we produce an integrated approach and an integrated solution, I think it has a greater chance of being successful. Thank you. And thanks all the participants and the panelists. It's been a real pleasure.
I'd love to jump on that if that's okay, Tim. But I just love what you just said, Christopher, because I'm feeling the same. Like, I think sometimes it feels like we're losing all the time and we're always on the defensive. And then I'm seeing what's kind of happening and how people are starting to work on a local level, regional level, international level, and all talking to each other and all of this movement building. And I think what buoys me is that I'm working on plastic, but plastic is only, even if we were to break free from plastic, there's still more work to do, right? But that's one small piece that's going to get us to a more just, sustainable world. So it's one small piece to get us to create the world that I want to live in, and that I think a lot of us on this panel probably want to live in as well. So I think it's thinking about, it's not just plastic. It's the you know, as Christopher was saying, it's the social issues tied to it. It's the economic issues tied to it. It's the environmental issues. It's the cultural issues. It's tied to so many different things that we're not just fighting on one issue. We're really touching on so many different intersections, and that's what keeps me going.
Well, I guess I'll just jump in and provide some final comments, but I'm happy to stay on as well for a little bit longer if there are questions. So you know, I've been around for a little while now, not too long. Hopefully it doesn't look like that, but I've been around for a while, and you know, this issue of plastic pollution has captured the imagination of the public and policymakers, unlike any issue that I've experienced since the hole in the ozone layer. I mean, the hole in the ozone layer was scary. I remember being as a child, and the response was immediate. And you know, the Montreal Protocol, the response to the hole in the ozone layer was, the Montreal Protocol is largely considered the most successful environmental treaty in the world because it profited off of a moment. And so while it may seem that plastics is taking a long time, I see it as going very quickly. And I see as an issue that is ever growing in the mind of the public and policymakers, and solutions are being put forward. And we're in this immediate testing phase of policies in certain regions, and other ones are catching up. And there's a heightened awareness of the problems to the ocean, to our bodies with the chemicals. You know, just the constant introduction of it to land and all the waterways and rivers and lakes. So, you know, this issue is very much live, and it's not going anywhere. We who are involving ourselves in it now are the ones who are creating the solution. And we will be the ones who will be reshaping the response. And so it's critically important that we are involved now. If you've been involved for a while, I've been involved for a little while, it may seem daunting, but in reality, when I think back at it, it's going so quickly, and we're shaping the response now, and it's not going to go away, which means we're going to have an opportunity to continually shape it going forward. So, so don't lose hope. I hope that's a little bit of perspective. You know, when you look at it and compare it to, as Christopher said, climate change and biodiversity, I think these are, you know, those are full-blown crises. I think plastic is heading that direction, but we have an opportunity to nip it in the bud. So, you know, keep hope alive.
Yeah, thank you. Just, yeah, I think we keep having 32 participants, which are which we would love to have them for a little bit while. And if you have any kind of question, Ron?
I actually have a question that probably Tim can answer. A lot of global sort of environmental issues are sometimes, you know, taken on by big companies because they want, you know, in the interest of stability. So have you seen any of the large plastic companies? Sometimes they do this as a way of pushing off their own action as well. But like, have you seen any sort of big plastic basically who say, yeah, we want to work on plastics, but we don't want to do it until there's a global agreement, because then, you know, we're not doing 50 different strategies in every different country? Or have you seen, you know, opposition from big plastic?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we should also need to separate out who we're talking about, because it's useful for thinking about the response. So we have the producers of products, the brands, which have a reputational risk when we're doing the brand audits, and we're, you know, people are sending back their bottles of Coca-Cola or the others. They're realizing that this is not good for the bottom line and or for how they're perceived of largely by the public. And those ones that have a reputational risk, we're much more easily able to engage. And we find that although there may be a certain amount of duplicity in the way they advocate at the national level versus what they might say in other forums, right? We just had a report that came out by Changing Markets that was focused on that. We find that there is some leverage there. That's a little bit different than, for example, the plastic producers, the petrochemical companies, basically the fossil fuel industry that, you know, is putting us on the brink of extinction as a race. So, so the target's different, very much so. But there is, you know, I'm not at liberty to disclose who, what, why, or where, but we will shortly be seeing a very big call from a series of well-known corporate entities for a global agreement. For this very reason, is I think they're tired of being on the other side of the issue. You know, we can butt heads constantly, and they can suffer the damage, and the environment can suffer, and we as well. Or they could become part of the solution and have that certainty and all the other, you know, the business case for a global agreement that you were speaking to. So we'll shortly be seeing some movement in that direction from a large number of companies. Not at liberty to disclose it. And so it does mean that there is a business case for it, is what that means, and that we need to make it. But again, this is a segment of the world that's involved in plastic, and we have a much harder time penetrating the producers and the petrochemical companies of the pellets and the raw materials that we use to make our products. They themselves are a different beast, and to be honest, are a bit immune. I mean, you know, we haven't been too successful on the climate side in really putting in the context how harmful their actions are. We always get in these endless debates. They have a lot of power, access to governments, and these are the ones that fundamentally, when we think about it, fundamentally, they're the ones who are driving the plastic pollution problem. So we need to find a way to access them.
Mm. Melissa,
yeah, you can see me just like, yeah. Oh my gosh, yes.
Could you share your thoughts, please?
It's frustrating for me that this is, in most cases, right, it's demand that's driving consumption, and plastic is somewhat unique in that it's the production of like, it's this like excess of oil and cheap gas and fracking, my little guest here, sorry, that is driving production. And I'll stop there for a second.
Yeah, thank you both for your answers. I really appreciate that. As I was saying to the panelists beforehand, I was in a meeting today with more than a dozen different countries' ministers of environment and ministers of state and things like that, we were discussing some of the priority action areas for oceans moving forward. And one of the big ones that was called on by countries, I can't name which countries, but was also about this global treaty. So I think, Tim, I'm also optimistic that maybe, you know, we are reaching both the pressure points from the corporate side, those with that reputation, and then also these big countries, these rich countries, to push this plastic treaty rapidly on the global agenda. And compared with some of the other issues that we talked about today, like 30 by 30, you know, in marine conservation areas and ABNJ biodiversity, and some other issues, I think plastic, I agree, has, you know, I'm really impressed at how quickly it's moved front and center to where, you know, we could even be discussing the fact that a global agreement with lots of people backing it could be, you know, start negotiations really soon. So I think it's really fantastic.
Yeah, I would like, because of what we are talking is very like corporations and big companies and plastic producers, and like 30 minutes before we had Catherine Perchat who asked, how can we stop fossil fuel giants from investing in plastic production facilities? This is a very big question, and one that I don't think that we can really answer. But if it's not, I have sorry. It's one that, in my opinion, it's a little bit out of our control. But what do you think as experts in policy?
I'll jump in a little bit and see if the answer makes sense. If not, everyone please clean it up. But so this is really tough because you know, these are private investors that are going about getting their permits for a market opportunity that they see in the future. Carbon Tracker recently came out with a report that looked at the business case for plastics, where we were skeptical of what the what the predictions were and the investments being made. But with that being said, the investments are still being made. So there's people who have confidence in putting their money behind it. But you know, we as a movement are engaging in a case-by-case challenge to the expansion of petrochemical and plastic production. But there's too much, there's too many fires arising for us to be able to put them all out. And the investments are being made despite opposition at times as well. And so there is going to be this continued effort where we find ourselves on the other side and trying to oppose expansion and or new investments. And we're going to win sometimes, we're going to lose sometimes, which means we're going to have more production that's going to be put on the market. And then there's countries where we don't really have that civil society access point, right? So you might think of China, some of the developments going on there, and there is much more difficult to imagine how you would oppose any given facility. And so this is why ultimately we've been slowly moving in our conversations on the required response at the international level from marine plastic pollution, marine litter. Well, marine litter is where it started, right? Marine litter meaning somebody littered. So they put the blame on the consumer. We said, no, it's marine plastic pollution. It's in the marine environment. But really, it's about plastic pollution, which includes land and in the marine environment. But really, it's about plastics. And when you start to think about plastics, it's not just about plastics after they're a product. It's plastics further up in the life cycle. So you have the design of plastics. And then we're now in the conversation where people are realizing that production is an issue. And we're hopeful that we can start to have countries or blocks of countries look at production and whether they actually need to invest, open up new production. We're not there yet, and we're still in this dogfight for every given expansion or whatnot. But at least the conversation has moved up to that space. And then linking it with other things, though, like climate. When you look at the climate impact of producing plastics, it's horrible. And when you look at what we need to hit a target of 1.5 degrees or even 2, it would take up a significant percentage of our carbon budget. And so roping into other issues as well that, you know, where we might be able to get leverage is important. And all I can say is we're trying, but there's no silver bullet or stellar advocacy approach to this issue.
I just want to say that chain that you described really described my own relationship with plastic, and kind of just like, oh, marine litter, you know, doing cleanups. Oh, wait a second, there's like a huge plastic problem, you know, in the ocean. Oh, wait a second, actually plastic kind of sucks. Oh, wait a second, you know, who's producing this stuff and flooding it on the market? So I think that really has mirrored my own. And I kind of hope that our series that we're doing here actually takes people really quickly in, you know, just 2 months through that journey that I've been through in many years of ocean work. So thanks so much for codifying that so well, Tim.
Yeah, I think Tim did an amazing job. Just to kind of add to that just a little bit, we are starting to link those site fights, right? So those individual, like in those regional fights to oppose a plant or whatever it is, we are starting to see those kind of being connected on the within like the United States and then on the international level. So I think that will make those arguments a little bit stronger and do some sharing of like what's working. But ultimately, yeah, the regional work is those like those grassroots organizations who are showing up every day to fight for clean air, clean water. But we are starting to see this kind of move from those regional site fights to national and international level, which I think is exciting. And we still have a lot of work to do. It's a beast that we have to defeat, but you know, again, we're seeing progress.
Awesome. Well, we have gone 15 minutes over. I would love to keep talking about this forever and ever. I'll give the last word to Patty to close it. And yeah, thanks to everybody who stayed even longer.
I was going to say that, Chris, would you like to add anything to this?
To that last point, not really. I think my colleagues have covered it. I think that change really needs to be a complete transformational one. I think it, as has been mentioned, I think it speaks to a progressive local, national, regional, sub-regional, global framework that has to look at alliances as well. I mean, we heard that we are very much on the environment agenda. We are at UNEA and the UNEP meetings. But this kind of discussion also has to take place within the big financial institutions who are giving loans and to businesses. As we look at this as a plastics issue, we have to also be looking at what are the workable alternatives and that we're not greenwashing again and coming up with something that's bioplastics, but it's not really. So I think it's not, as was mentioned, there's no silver bullet for this one, but I think it's something that has to be incremental. We have to build alliances. It can't just be all developing countries talking or developed countries talking or poor and rich countries. It has to be partnerships that bring this to the table and bring it to many tables, not just the environment fraternity, but the business fraternity as well.
Exactly. And as Ron said, it all the time gets back to finance and ultimately also our behavior. And I understand that in some cases, families that are like have 2, 3, 4 children, or someone that it's single but don't have a job, doesn't have a job, like you cannot always change as much your behavior as much as you want, because the system is broken. The system doesn't work. So yeah. So thank you very much for everyone, because I know how really busy the 3 of you are. I have the pleasure to meet you and work with you in the past, and I really know how busy you are. So I'm very happy that that you took an hour and a half or an hour and 20 minutes to be here with us and with our SOA young leaders. So thank you very much and hope to see you soon. And please send us over any report that you would like to feed us with. We will be very happy to take them. So thank you very much, and
thanks again, everyone. And
thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you. Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody.
It's a pleasure.
Ciao. Also remember to all the participants that the questions that have not been answered will be answered by the newsletter or email. Ciao.